Yes, you read the title of this video correctly. I read Honglu's source material so that I could be one of the 7 whole people in the community that could actually tolerate reading such a long book. I started reading Dream of the Red Chamber at around the start of Canto 6, and only a couple of weeks ago have I actually gotten around to finishing it. So yes, that means that Honglu's source material took the better part of an entire year for me to finish. And I want to somehow put that knowledge of Honglu's source material to use in some capacity, and give you a retelling of the book along with some theories of, at the time of recording, the upcoming Canto 8. But there's a good chance you are watching this after that's been released as well. Dream of the Red Chamber is a stupendously long book, but also stick around because I need that watch time to be really high so I can actually feel gratified for putting this much effort into reading the 11th longest book ever made. And for information's sake, I read the version that is 2500 pages long. And yes, this video is releasing right before Canto 8, and heck, if I'm lazy, this video may release during or after Canto 8. But that is an issue for editing well later to worry about. And because of that, I may consider doing a 2-parter of this, if there is enough interest for it. Where part 2 will go over what we know after Canto 8. But honestly, let's be real here for a sec. If you are an avid Wellwader fan, then you and I both know that I am not known for my multiple part series. Anyway, I know that for some people the segment where I talk about the book is going to be ridiculously boring, and trust me, it is. But I do suggest sticking around for it. Because as much as I joke that I am one of the 7 people in the community who finish the book, there really may just be 7 people in the entire community that actually finish this book. You're probably not going to get a summary of the book anywhere else from the perspective of someone who has Project Moon brain rot. But if you want to completely disregard my desperate pleas to get you to watch the video for longer, then you can go to my theory crafting segment at this timestamp. Anyway, that is enough begging on my hands and knees, I think, so let's get to the actual book. To start us off with, I want to state that Honglu's source material is a bit controversial among Chinese readers. This is because the last 2 volumes of this 7-volume novel was not actually published by the original author, Jade Qilin, but instead a friend of Jade Qilin, or brother or printer, I don't know to be told, because at this point, who he was to Jade Qilin, or even who he is, supposedly it was written by a person by the name of Gao E, but even that we're unsure of. All we know is that this person who wrote the last 40 pages of the book was in one way or another relevant to the original author. And I will be including the 40 pages he wrote because I'm pretty sure Project Moon will include them as well. I have proof for that even, but put a pin in that because it's relevant for later. Dream of the Red Chamber doesn't actually start off with Honglu's family yet. Instead, it starts off thousands of years before the events of the book. Nuwa is a god of creation and is said to have made the humans as a whole. And in primordial times there was a crack in the sky that she was trying to fix in the story of the book. To fix this crack in the sky, she molded 36,501 stones, but in repairing so, left behind 1 stone. This stone had magical powers and actually had a consciousness and desire of its own. The stone decided to go see the human world but couldn't, because well, it's a darn stone. That is until a Buddhist monk and a Taoist priest came along. They found out that the stone had a consciousness and after a bit of chatting, granted the stone the offer to be reincarnated into a human so that they could experience human life. And this led to the stone eventually being reborn as Xia Baoyu, or as we know him, Honglu. Immediately for some we can see a sort of already obvious link to Limbus Company here. I mean, come on, a Buddhist and a Taoist with magical abilities to reincarnate a stone sounds like the blue boy band we all know and love. However, in Limbus Company, Honglu's grandmother, Grandma Xia, could also take this role of having Honglu experience the human world because of some of the dialogue we've heard in the game. This is how the story of the RTRC starts. And just so you know, the RTRC is a book that covers a heck of a lot of facets of the Xia family and their eventual decline. There's a reason this book is 2500 pages long. Heck, this book has over 400 characters and 40 of which are really plot relevant. So as much as I'd love to make this a 10-hour long video talking about everything there is to talk about, I want to try and keep it as condensed and relevant as possible. Obviously I'll mention characters like Xia Huan and Xia Shichun, who we met in Limbus Company, but don't expect a review of every single character there is. Xia Baoyu was born with a jade in his mouth, which in Limbus Company is the jade eye he has. And Xia Baoyu also had an affinity with women, as from a very young age he would always prefer to hang out, talk and be friends with women. Which speaking of, there are a lot of women in the RTRC, because I'm pretty sure 80% of the book's cast is female. Also for simplicity's sake and so you don't lose the plot, I'll be referring to Xia Baoyu as Honglu for this video, as they are practically one and the same. And yes, there's also a reason why Project Moon changed his name. I'll talk about that later in the theory section, so put another darn pin in that. The first volume of the RTRC goes over the affluent and wealthy lifestyle of the Xia family and their two households, the Ningguo and the Ronggua house. Grandmother Xia runs these two households and is the matriarch of the Xia family and really dotes on Honglu a lot throughout the book. In the book, basically whenever Honglu and her are together in the same scene, Honglu gets completely spoiled to bits and she will often take the side of Honglu in any kind of argument that comes up. But in Limbus Company that might not exactly be the same. Put another pin in that, please. Another few important characters are Xia Huan and Xia Xichun. Xia Huan is Honglu's half-brother in the book, but in Limbus Company they are simply brothers. Then there's also Xia Xichun, who lives in the Ningguo house. I'm going to try to keep this brief so it doesn't get too confusing, but some of the more relevant characters that have not been mentioned in Limbus Company are Wang Xifang, Xia Wanchun, Lady Wang, Xia Xiang, and especially two really important characters that eventually form a love triangle with Honglu are Lin Dayu and Xua Baochai. Wang Xifang is practically the one running the entire Xia family household, as she's the one keeping everything in check, imagining the mates of the Xia family, Xia Wanchun, who is Honglu's elder sister, and Lady Wan and Xia Xiang are respectively Honglu's mother and father. And then we have Lin Dayu and Xua Baochai. They are super relevant to the plot and basically form the three main characters of the book. Lin Dayu is a woman who is described by the book as very intelligent, witty and talented, but very fragile as she has an illness that makes her just very frail. Whereas Xua Baochai is a very beautiful, considerate and tactful woman. And what is important about these two characters is that they are meant to complement each other. Where Xua Baochai lacks intelligence, Lin Dayu makes up with her own. Where Lin Dayu lacks in manners, Xua Baochai makes up for it. And this is extremely relevant to the thematic of double teaming. And as for this term, really keep it in mind because this is going to play a really important part later down in the theory section. Dayu and Baochai together represent what is, according to the author of the book, the ideal woman. While both characters are flawed, together they complete and contrast one another. Volume 1 goes over the basic lives of the Xia family household and when they are at their wealthiest, and this story is really as much about the entire family as it is about Honglu himself. There's a reason there are 400 characters, and that is because this story covers a lot of different tales about this family. While we are told about Honglu's life in the first volume and how much he cherishes the girls in his family and especially his three head mates, Maid Musk, Maid Skybright and Maid Aroma, it is equally about other characters. The most important plot point in the first volume is actually about Xia Wanchun. Wanchun is a character that is briefly mentioned as one of the most deadly sisters that Honglu and Xichun in the game have. But in the book she's an outstanding paradigm of virtue and intelligence, so much so that she ends up catching the attention of the Chinese emperor and later becomes his consort. And this is what takes primary focus in Volume 1, as the entire Xia family household prepared for festivities for this event. And the celebrations of what this does for the Xia family's political power is a really big plot point in the first volume. And another really big plot point that is definitely worth mentioning is Honglu's exposure to the Land of Illusion. Yes guys, it's the name of the ego. No way, I can't believe it, the ego is relevant to the plot. Editing Will Vader is sort of Wojak Bulkface here or something. In chapter 5 of the book, he meets a fairy by the name of Disenchantment. This is a fairy who he meets in the Land of Illusion after being lured into bed. And I'm going to really need to beat around the bush here. But in the Land of Illusion, he gets educated on some pretty freaky activities. And Honglu, well, he happens to be a visual learner. In fact, he happens to be the guy who very much so learns by putting things into practice. So yeah, after that he is toured through heaven and shown the archive of every woman in China. He ends up learning a lot about women and the Land of Illusion, but right as he is kicked out of heaven by Disenchantment, we get some offhand heavy foreshadowing, as she warns him, since ancient times, many lusty men say it's a woman's beauty that inspired them to commit wanton crimes. They are just an excuse to cover up their deeds. And you are the most lustful person in the world. Change your thoughts on love. Devote your mind to Confucius and Mencius for the betterment of society. And not gonna lie, this line is low-key fire for like 18th century Chinese literature. Anyway, in case it isn't obvious, lust and love play a heavy role in the story. Story-wise, it is because the love triangle of Baochai, Dayu and Honglu is very vaguely established, which takes center plot for most of the book after the celebrations, but also the thematics. A lot of the people who have read the OTRC in this community have talked about it openly, miss a lot of the finer details and symbolism in the book, because for example, in Chinese, a jade represents lust, and guess what Honglu was born with? A jade. And also Disenchantment is supposed to be a combination of both Bao Chai and Dai Yu. And really is one of the stepping stones for the love triangle of these three characters to get started in the first place. This love triangle is developed further in volume 2 as Honglu and Dai Yu start to grow closer. And the game Honglu vaguely hints towards the central plot of this volume, as in this volume we really start to see Honglu and his friendly relationship with his sisters and mates as they flourish and start a poetry club. And the quirk of Book Honglu is that he really loves poetry. It is probably his most well-defining feature, other than being really friendly towards women. This part of the novel is also a lot more about the mate of the family, who I have not mentioned so far. But mates in the Xia family are treated very well. In fact, the Xia family kind of prides itself on that. A few of the important mates are Mate Patience, Mate Musk, Mate Skybright, Mate Aroma,
Faithful,
Patient and
Faithful,
respectively are the mates of Grandmother Xia and Wan Shifeng. Both of them are really capable in their own rights, and because they are two mates of basically the most highly influential woman in the family, they also have a lot of power themselves. And I want to bet that we are probably going to see them in Canto 8. As for Musk, Skybright and Aroma, they are mates to Bao Yu and often serve as an outlet for Honglu to vent his frustrations to. Musk being kinda considerate and often being the source of comfort to Honglu. Skybright being brash but very devoted and often is the one arguing against Honglu when he has any stupid ideas. And lastly is Aroma, also a very considerate mate that always worries about Honglu and looks after him. And even though the mates are side characters, they do inform a lot of Honglu's growth and his interactions with girls going forward. Volume 3 is kinda where crap starts hitting the fan slowly but surely, and is where the downfall of the Xia family slowly starts to happen. During this volume a lot of celebrations happen. For example, we have Grandmother Xia's 80th birthday, Honglu's birthday, Wan Shifeng's birthday happening, and of course the Xia family being rich and affluent spent way too much money on their birthday. Especially for Grandmother Xia, who they celebrate 3 whole days for. Money starts to very slowly and steadily become an issue in this volume. On top of that, Shifeng also falls ill this volume, and management is left in the hand of less competent people, and so mismanagement also starts to become a slight issue in this otherwise really orderly and well-mannered household. Even Honglu's poetry club starts to slowly fall apart because of girls growing up, being married off, or sometimes even outright dying. And Honglu in this volume has difficulties processing his feelings about change, because a lot of what brought him joy was the poetry club. Drama also starts playing a big role, and in comes Jia Huan. Jia Huan, contrary to the game, is not a badass older brother, but rather he's the half-brother born to their father's concubine. Jia Huan is not often relevant in the book, but in the scenes he is in, he takes center stage. In the book he's portrayed as always being really envious of Honglu, and that especially shows near the end of volume 2, where jealousy and seeing Honglu get treated so well by the girls in the family, when he himself isn't, tries to scar Honglu by attempting to spill candle wax on his eyes. And this is 100%, without a second of a doubt, going to be relevant in Limbus Company knowing Honglu's eye. Just you wait. This results in not only a traumatizing experience for Honglu, but also the entire family basically screaming Bloody Mary, as everyone is in a panic for the next few days. Because if something were to dare happen to Grandmother Xia's favorite grandchild, pretty much no one would survive. Thankfully he does recover, but Jia Huan's deeds do not end there, as in volume 3 he ends up spreading that, oh dear god, I'm gonna need to really beat around the bush with this one again. Jia Huan spreads rumors to Xia Zheng, Honglu's dad, that Honglu did something bad to one of his mates, and that something is this fruit, except you remove the very first letter from the name of this fruit. And as a result, Honglu is nearly beaten to death by Xia Zheng, and the entire family erupts into chaos. So yeah, man, Chinese literature back in the 18th century was crazy. And if all that wasn't enough to show that his family is significantly hurting Honglu and his mental health, one of his mates, Musk, dies from an illness. And this leaves Honglu very melancholic for the next few days, as Musk was one of the very few people who have defined Honglu's character so far. And now it's like a part of him is completely gone. And for volume 4 and 5, I want to combine the two, as they are both written by the different author. But also because this kind of falls under the umbrella of the "it's so f***ing over" arc. This volume is where the financial woes of the Xia family really gets obvious and more illnesses start to happen, which cause the family to basically become dysfunctional. And unfortunately, Mage Skybright also falls victim to this. Skybright, among the maids, at least described by the book, was one of the maids that looked the absolute prettiest. And this, because everyone is on constant edge, and also because there were rumors spreading around of her having an affair with Honglu, causes the maids to become jealous of her and saying that her beauty is giving her an unfair advantage. Nearly all the other maids conspire to have her kicked out of the household, which does eventually happen. And during all this, Honglu can't get over letting Skybright and their friendship go like that. To the point where he visits her hometown mostly on his own to go help her, upon learning that she's fallen ill. Unfortunately for Honglu, despite how much he looks after Skybright, it looks like her illness won't get any better. And Skybright, probably knowing her fate already, imparts Honglu with a memorabilia. You see, back in ancient China, it was a custom for some to grow out their nails as a sort of fashion statement. And Skybright did exactly this. For years she had been growing out the nails from her pinky and ring finger, and since she knew she didn't have much time left on this earth, she gave them to Honglu. This catches Honglu by surprise and worries him more than it does her. But he eventually accepts it, and after Skybright argues for Honglu to go home, he eventually left. And Skybright would unfortunately pass away the very next day at night. Honglu and Skybright actually had such a close connection to the point where he quite literally feels her dead and screams out in the middle of the night, lamenting her, with news of her passing only coming to the rest of the family the day later. And the suffering does not end there, as Honglu actually ends up losing the jade that he carries around with him in volume 4. And for lack of a better word, he basically contracts stage 5 terminal brain rot. Through some weird magical force, basically all of Honglu's motor functionality as a human being ceases to exist the longer he's away from the jade. He can barely even feel emotions anymore. He's always zoning out, and after a few days, he can barely remember the name of people and talk, as a robot needs to do a lot of the talking for him. Because he himself now literally has the literary understanding of the average Project Moon fan. The family, of course, goes into complete meltdown. The jade was given a lot of sentimental value by the family and especially grandmother Xia. And once word has spread throughout the entire family, everyone didn't know what to do next. They tried to look for if someone had stolen it, if it's been sold on the flea market, or tried to search for a replacement, but nothing worked. And as Honglu's mental health deteriorated, the heads of the family believe it was because bad karma was causing this. And that the only way to heal Honglu was to bring him good karma. The family eventually came to only one conclusion. Honglu was to marry Zhe Baochai to heal him. You see, Zhe Baochai always carried a golden locket with her, which was given to her by a Buddhist monk during her childhood. And the inscription of the golden locket matches with the inscription of Honglu's jade. This led the family to believe that possibly if they were to marry, it would cause good luck. After all, the marriage of jade and gold has a nice ring to it. One issue remains, however, and that is that Honglu loves Lin Daiyu, not Xiao Baochai, and he would never agree to marry anyone other than Lin Daiyu. Because over the course of the book, their love has started to flourish into new heights, to the point where in a part of the book, they repeatedly spent days with each other, and no one else. That is when Shifeng hatched a plan. Honglu, in the state that he is, could barely even think and know the names of people. So what if they just tricked Honglu into believing he was marrying Lin Daiyu? The family was hesitant to pull off this disgustingly mean deception. But at this point, they had no other chance to heal Honglu as his mental state only worsened. Lin Daiyu eventually catches wind of this, and the illness she already had since birth became immediately worse from the heartache she felt. She even started seeing visions of that the family no longer saw her as needed, and even a vision of Honglu ripping out his heart and giving it to Daiyu in a show of love. And from all this heartbreak, this drove her even more mad and sickly, all the while Baochai and Honglu's marriage was slowly approaching. Baochai was not happy with this either. While Honglu was a close friend to hers, he was exactly the opposite of what she desired from a romantic partner. She could never see herself be happy with him in an arranged marriage like this. Not to mention that both Zhe Baochai and Lin Daiyu felt repulsed by the idea of lying to Honglu in a manner like this. While Lin Daiyu couldn't do anything because she was sick, Zhe Baochai couldn't do anything because she felt like she had no power to reject this. The day of the marriage eventually came closer and closer as Daiyu's health only worsened. She sat in her own bed, sick, all the while her friend filled in for her at her own marriage with the love of her life. Honglu, meanwhile, was none the wiser. Everything went according to Shifeng's plan. Even as Bao Chai's veil almost fell off when she was bowing, Honglu quickly grabbed it so it wouldn't fall and reveal her face. The heads of the family were constantly anxious as the vow of the marriage would come up. Bao Chai would, one way or another, have to eventually unveil herself. And once she did... Honglu immediately recognized that it was not Dayu crying tears of joy in front of him, but instead Bao Chai's dejected and sad tears. And meanwhile, Lin Dayu, who was all alone in her bedroom while everyone was at the marriage, would unfortunately pass away from sheer heartache, not being able to marry the one person she loved, and all while Honglu was deceived into marrying someone else. The next morning he locked himself up in his room and demanded to know where the real Lin Dayu was. The maids couldn't tell him as they got direct orders from grandmother Jia to not tell Honglu, but the news was unfortunately one way or another leaked to him eventually, and he learned of Lin Dayu's death. And just imagine for a second what Honglu must have thought at this point. He had spent his entire life with his family, had so many great experiences, and he had seen the people who he had these great experiences with leave, be married off, or die due to illnesses. He'd so many people taken away from him already, and now the one person that meant the world to him had also passed away. What kind of word could even begin to describe the tremendous sadness that Honglu must have felt? Rightly so, Honglu fell into a depression that would persist with him until the end of the book, knowing that he and Dayu are now separated by life and death. He would even attempt to prematurely perish to meet Dayu in heaven, but as he tried so, he got a vision of him being on the Nether Road, with two guardians in front of the gates of hell, telling him that if he prematurely tried to go to heaven, that he would only go to hell, and that he must become a monk and let go of his earthly desires if he wishes to ever have a chance to meet Dayu again in the land of illusion one day. Honglu even starts to hear the voice of Lin Dayu as he starts to have visions and becomes disillusioned with the world, blowing on the dandelion as he hears Dayu's words and speaks with her, mentioning that she has turned into a flower fairy in her new reincarnation, and saying that she has repaid her debt of tears, but how could he ever repay the debt that he owes her? And yes, this is the bit I was referring to way back when in my proof of how Volume 4 and 5 are canon to Limbus Company, as we see art that resembles the same scene in the TG estimator for the game. The life of the household continues to crumble as they get into trouble with the law for mismanaging funds, and the imperial consort, Jia Wanchun, dies as well alongside grandmother Jia shortly after. They steadily lose all the last remaining prestige and power that the family once had throughout the rest of Volume 5. And they have one last hope which ends up being swiftly crushed, that being Honglu. You see, at the time the imperial examinations were to happen and a lot of people across China were tested on their knowledge. This, if Honglu did very well the test, could bring honor and prestige back to the family. And Honglu did end up doing well as he came to 7th place. However, he never returned to his family. From here, all the remaining power of the family is slowly drained as the family almost fully collapses. And weeks, maybe even months, maybe even a year later, Honglu's father, Jia Sheng, was sent out of town on a business trip. And in the middle of the night, Honglu would come to him alongside the monk and the priest from the very beginning of the book. Honglu would wordlessly kneel and bow before his father, as the monk and the priest told him that his earthly karma was complete. Jia Sheng could not chase after Honglu, as the three of them slowly started to take off as a song could be heard by one of them, which is actually a reference to the name of Honglu's weapon, which has a very similar name to some of the lyrics in the song. Well, anyway, now that we're done with that, How the heck does this tell us anything about the game Honglu? Well, I'll tell you what this definitely tells you, however. To subscribe if you're enjoying the video, of course. Like, please actually do. This book took me almost an entire year to read, so it would be really appreciated if you could show me some support. Or heck, if you want, you can even become a member of the channel to help fund the channel and help improve my videos in the future. And help me afford the next book I'll read. Ryosu's source material, Hellscream. But anyway, back to what I think this already says about Honglu. And I think the best place to start off with is where Honglu starts off at when he joins Limbus Company. If you happen to have read Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, you would know that, for example, Heathcliff's departure and eventual return midway through the book coincides with when Heathcliff returns to his home in Canto 6. And so, knowing this, the most likely answer you're thinking of in your head is that Honglu joined Limbus Company after book Honglu left with a Taoist and a Buddhist, right? Well, it turns out that question can both be yes and no, actually. Yeah, hey, editing Melvader here. Turns out that this point I'm making is completely goddamn wrong. You see, originally I was going to have a whole talk about how Honglu could both be from the ending of the book and the start of the book, because the way he acts near the end of the book is similar to how he acts in game, and also that the motivations for him joining Limbus Company is similar to the motivations that Honglu as a stone had for becoming human. But turns out in Nocturnal Sweeping it's revealed that it's neither of those, and we are dealing with the Honglu that is on the way to the national examination in the book. Or as we know it, the family hierarchical evaluation. Police blame Melvader from a week ago for thinking that Nocturnal Sweeping wouldn't screw over the video editing process for editing Melvader. Me from the past, go f*** yourself. Why did you write a script 1 week before the important event? How stupid are you? Anyway, Nocturnal Sweeping surprisingly doesn't screw over the video too much. This is the only section along with one other in the next few minutes that I had to change. And surprisingly enough, a lot of the information in Nocturnal Sweeping actually reinforces the theories that I had cooking up. For once, the Limbus Company content creator curse didn't screw one of us over. Which is honestly a first in the history of the YouTube side of Limbus Company. Anyway, Nocturnal Sweeping did introduce a lot of new characters, and I want to talk about some of those some way later, because fun fact, they actually only confirm what I have written in the rest of the script. In case you're wondering, none of these characters are actually from the book, funnily enough. And in fact, Project Moon takes a heck of a lot of creative liberties with the story. Because for example, Honglu's grandfather that he mentions occasionally is not actually present in the book and is dead before the events of the Jia family. Anyway, that's all I wanted to add. Back to me from the past. Project Moon takes a lot of creative liberties when it comes to portraying the Jia family. Throughout the entire story, and also from the offhand mentions of Jade Qilin, we learn that the Jia family household is actually really brutal, and that all the siblings in the household seem to constantly fight. And we don't mean the classic case of siblings getting upset over the others getting more time on the Xbox, no, we mean literal fights to the death. And speaking of creative liberties, Wei is not even supposed to exist, like I said before. Does Bro think he's part of the team? The only possible explanation I could give as to Wei's existence is that this is a classic case of Project Moon gender bending, like what happened to Josephine, who originally was an old butler called Joseph in Wuthering Heights. Like, so much change that Canto 6 and 7 look like a joke compared to how far Canto 8 already is from its own source material. Because at least for the earlier Cantos there is a vague resemblance, but here the entire script has been completely flipped on its head and twisted around a good 6 or 7 times. And then there's the question of why the heck are all the siblings in the Xia family made to fight? And especially why is Jade Qilin looking for the river that could grant immortality of the mind? And what does that have to do with surviving as heirs? You know how financial troubles are a big cause of the downfall of the Xia family and a big aspect of the story that drives it forward in the book? Well, both Honglu and Jade Qilin completely deny being in on the La Mancha Land job for the money. In fact, we never get any kind of mention of Honglu's family ever having monetary problems. And actually Honglu leads us to believe he can easily afford to pay off Limbus Company debt in the time-killing time event. And all this may lead you to believe that, oh, clearly we're dealing with a Honglu from before the Xia family household downfall. However, we could confirm that if it wasn't for a single goddamn line written in the observation logs by Honglu saying how he knows he has seen what kind of misfortune the lack of money can cause people. Am I reading into this line in particular way too much? Probably, because let's be real, Honglu has probably seen a homeless person at some point in his life, at least I hope so. And frankly, we aren't working with much information to begin with. Honglu is a sinner that talks the second least out of any of the sinners, only being beat out by Ryosu. And that doesn't change unless Nocturnal Sweeping is going to significantly change that, which it probably will, and editing Will Vader will proceed to repeatedly slam his head into the desk if it will. However, there is still one bit of information that we can work with, and actually ties all of these very loose threads together, and is probably a massive hint towards what's going to happen in Canto 8. And that is this single tweet from Project Moon before the game released, in which they mentioned a color fixer by the name of the Jade Qilin. Yes, you won't be surprised that one of the more potentially bigger hints towards Canto 8 is a mention of a potential color fixer in a tweet from years ago before Limbus Company were released. But that just goes to show how dedicated I am to my husband Honglu. Hey, by the way, did you know I'm a Honglu fan? Well, now you know. Anyway, you may be wondering how this color fixer is relevant and who exactly he is. As for how it's relevant, well, if you happen to completely skip to the theory part of the video and completely disregard the book summary, first of all, shame on you and you should probably go watch that. And second of all, it would be pretty obvious why JHR central focus on Honglu's story. And who is he exactly? Well, you will be surprised to learn that we don't even have a clue to who he is. This is literally coming from a Twitter post from years ago. What the heck did you expect? However, what I can tell you about is the definition of the word Qilin. Qilin is derived from ancient Chinese mythology that resembles an animal that has the body of a deer and the tail of an ox, and a single horn on its forehead, and having a yellow belly and a multicolored back. This creature typically coincides with the birth or death of a ruler, as in the most famous story it is associated with, a Qilin appears to the pregnant mother of Confucius and carved off a jade tablet that foretold the future greatness of her unborn child. Another interesting fact is that the word Qilin in Chinese is made up of the words Qi and Lin, which stands for male and female respectively. I found this noteworthy to mention because it adds to the fake undertone of double teaming that occurs throughout the story, and I'll be mentioning this again later. And hey, it's me, editing Will Vader again, to give you a little amendment to the script. You know how the story of the Qilin is related to Confucius? Well, it turns out that the script I wrote a week before Nocturnal Sweeping actually came very close to predicting who we would meet in the event. Because it turns out that Jade Qilin is Confucius. You see, while we don't know much about Qi, what we do know is that he shares a first name with Confucius himself, that being Qi. Now, why do you think Project Moon would add Confucius but f***ed up an Evo into their game? Surely they did not to just have some silly references to great figures in Chinese history. I mean, they very well could, but personally I think that the addition of Qi is very deliberate because of his connections to the Qilin. I don't think anyone quite understands how massive of a hint Jade Qilin's addition to the game is. And if the Jade Qilin does happen to be relevant in Canto 8, call me goddamn Confucius for my mental clarity and wisdom can predict the future. Anyway, how does this add to our understanding of this hypothetical color fixer? Not much, honestly. All we know is that in his or her name, there's the reoccurring thematic of double teaming, which I think is very deliberate on Project Moon's behalf. However, we can infer what the Jade Qilin may mean to the family. You see, I think that the Jade Qilin could not only be a central plot point in Canto 8, but also the reason for why Honglu and his siblings fight, why Xing was looking for the river that could grant immortality of the mind, and what causes the eventual downfall of the Xia family. Now we need to start with the very basics to first understand how we could get to a conclusion like that. And that's understanding why the Xia siblings fight each other in the first place. For fun? But honestly, knowing the city, that could very well be the case. But that aside, there has to be a reason why a rich and affluent family would make their own descendants fight to the death. Like, wouldn't the royal family want as many children as possible to increase their chance of their lineage and power to continue on for as long as possible? And you'd be right in assuming that. But that still doesn't answer the central question here. Why are they incentivized to fight and take out their other siblings? Personally, I think that is because someone needs to take up the role as the new Jade Qilin. Because why else would the Xia family have a constant anime tournament arc going on in their household? And that is not the only reason I believe this, because from what Jade Qilin says, we can also affirm that what she and the rest are possibly after also has to do with this. Because think about it, why would Jade Qilin and the other siblings be looking for something that could grant immortality? Perhaps it could be because the current prized duo of the Xia family, the Jade Qilin, is growing older and needs to be replaced. And if they could somehow make his mental health never deteriorate, they could possibly have a near immortal color fixer permanently under the family name. That that is what leads me to believe that the reason why Hongnu and his siblings fight and why they're looking for the river that could give him mortality of the mind is because the Xia family's prized champion, the Jade Qilin, is low-key falling off. Unfortunately, the goat of the Xia family has become completely washed, and it is likely that a family as influential and powerful as theirs is using the Jade Qilin as a symbol of their prestige, much like how in the book Hongnu's Jade was a symbol of the family's prestige. And we may very well see the death of a color fixer and someone having to step up to take their place. Or else the Xia family's diplomatic power will collapse overnight. Well, we're probably not going to see them actually fall in battle, we're probably going to see them in their deathbed. But hey, it makes it sound more interesting. And now that that is out of the way, there's one really large question remaining. Now that we know what the book means to Canto 8 and what the hints of Canto 8 mean for the plot, what does the plot of Canto 8 mean for Hongnu? Probably absolute misery actually. There's a reason why the #1 funniest joke surrounding Hongnu is that this happy little fella is going to have the most depressing Canto out of all of them. And I don't really think I could convey just how sad Canto 8 may be. And while my skills lie within theories, I think that talking about the sinner's stories and their emotional weight behind it lies a lot more with someone else. And that is why I want to introduce you to someone who you may know for the excellent deep dive into the sinners and their unconditional love for Moses from the hit web series Distortion Detective, Frey Cheqama.
Aw, thanks, well, you know just how much I love to ruin someone's day. The Fumo told me that I should yap about myself and do some kind of introduction, so why not? Well, let's see. I'm Frey, and much like Vader, I also dabble in some Project Moon shit. I can swear on here, right? Yeah, whatever. But I also moonlight in putting some terrible ideas in people's heads for the world to see. So whether it's through some hear me out theories or a challenge that just might make you want to vomit with glee, you know where to find me. But seriously, it's like 3 AM, Welv's worked on this for about a year, subscribe to the guy. Seriously, he didn't ask me to tell you this, I'm telling you this now. Fuck it, he put in the work. This is huge as an essayist that cares about accuracy and emotional integrity. Dear God, man, the dude's earned it. Anyway, he didn't bring me on here just to shill. As Vader said, yeah, you may definitely know me from my videos about the other sinners and my other theories. And the topic of Honglu is one I think has eluded a lot of people in this community. Not because there's nothing going on inside of his noggin, if anything I'm sure his head's a damn close to bursting, but as Welvy said, the Honglu in the book contains multitudes that are harder to peel than either an onion or a blood fiend. And that's exactly why I'm here. As said before, Honglu in the book is a ridiculously tragic character. Those he considers dear friends constantly leave him, the maids he trusts either die of illness or are sent off because of the family fallout. And on top of that, he was forced into an unhappy marriage where he was catfished into marrying Xue Baochai instead of Lin Daiyu, only to learn the real deal caught a terminal case of lovesickness. And oh boy, if Project Moon somehow manages to cram all that pain and suffering into the story on top of what we already know about Honglu's family, then baby, there's gonna be a body count on this emotional roller coaster. And the wheels may already be in motion, because Honglu, from the very little he shared with us, has some really bad undertones. Take for example his ID uptie stories. If you look through them, in almost every single one, there's an overarching concept that ties them all together. And that concept is nihilism. And look, I know that's a dog whistle to the clown fans in the audience, but we're talking about the very definition of nihilism itself, the rejection of all religious and moral principles, and the belief that life is meaningless. Which low-key based, and you especially have to keep the last part in mind, as meaninglessness is a big thing that ties all of Honglu's identities together. For example, we have identities like K-Corp Honglu, W-Corp Honglu, and Fang Hunt Office Honglu, where this meaninglessness is really obvious. In K-Corp and W-Corp, we see Honglu living a steady life at a wing, but that's really all they do. They live life at a wing. Both of these identities express that they got their job through family connections and don't seem to be happy or sad with it. K-Corp Honglu says that his grandmother got him the job and that he frankly does not care what his grandmother thinks. And in W Corp, we see him meaninglessly go along with the job and just act like he's drifting to the whims of his family, as we can see in the Uptie story. Now, with identities like Fang Hunt Office, the meaninglessness takes on a little bit of a different flavor. Instead of seeing no meaning in his job, he instead sees no meaning in the lives he takes as he brutally takes them out one after another. And as the last of the Blood Fiends plead with him to spare their lives, his only retort is that they're a Blood Fiend. What other reason does he need to take their life? And it's not just in these three. In every single Uptie story, meaninglessness plays some sort of role. Whether it's Honglu's motivator like with Fang Hunt, a result of his actions as we can see in the Diechi Association Honglu, and him using up his knowledge and not caring about it, or even something as small as simply not addressing his superiors by their appropriate title like in the Kurokumo identity. Meaninglessness plays a constant role in Honglu's story. And it really makes you wonder, why even is Honglu so disconnected with reality in the first place? Why is it that Honglu will not only time and time again make incredibly awkward and out-of-nowhere statements about his family in the earlier Cantos, but also really dark and disturbing hints towards how he views life in the more recent Cantos and Intervalos? Why is it, for example, during Time Killing Time, Honglu is the one to step up to the Time Ripper and simply accept whatever happens, even if he could end up failing? Why does Honglu blatantly say in Canto 7 that if death comes for him, that he'll simply accept it? Why does he share that if siblings in his household survive up until the age of 13, that they will be A-okay in the outskirts all by themselves? That sure is a whack-ass inside joke for a family to have. And when you look at some of these moments and just try to read a bit in between the lines, does this not read as someone who is actually very deeply troubled? Even Book Honglu didn't say lines like this or openly shared these kinds of disturbing comments. You know, just like the kind of cope, and just like the comments you'd find in Welvader's Soup Claire video. Got him! You don't have to keep that in, stupid. And while the egos aren't nearly as relevant to Honglu's character, there is one exception that tells us more than any other story could in a single glance. That ego being Land of Illusion. Land of Illusion is one of the very few times we actually get a proper insight into Honglu's mental space. And while many people often mistake the ego for Honglu's usual self, if you take a second to look at Honglu's expression, he looks like he's on the verge of tears. And that's quite an interesting design choice by Project Moon, because usually the ego animation goes by quite fast, and especially the expression is hard to catch because it's so small. But almost intentionally, as if it's a sort of thinly veiled disguise, we can see that this is the only time in the game where we can see Honglu genuinely sad and miserable. And why wouldn't he be? Anyone would be, knowing what he went through or what he most certainly will go through in Canto 8. Not to mention that on top of everything that's come up so far, he's likely either already lost the love of his life or is going to in Canto 8. And while Book Honglu tried to get rid of his earthly desires to one day meet Lin Dayu again, what we see of the Honglu we know is someone going through life without a purpose, putting up a thinly veiled visage and occasionally allowing it to break. And those moments where he completely breaks character, while presented as a joke because of how disillusioned he presents himself as coming from a rich background, I don't know about you, but to me, these sound like a desperate call for help. Behavior like this is often found in people who no longer find themselves with a will to keep putting up with life anymore. People who, in all of their time sinking deeper and deeper into a pit of emotions, can only but just barely muster the energy to joke about their condition in the hopes that it'll one day get better. And let's just call it what it is. Honglu suffers from severe depression, and that's different. In Canto 5, we saw Dante motivate Ishmael and steer her on a better path. In Canto 6, Dante lost control over Heathcliff, but eventually helped him through his grief and consoled him. In Canto 7, we saw Dante struggle with trying to reach out to Sancho's broken dream and, with some help, eventually sparked the flames of passion within her yet again. But while with Sancho, it was only a dream that she gave up on, what Dante has to handle isn't someone who's given up on anything, but who sees no meaning in even wanting. Honglu, who much like Yi Song in Canto 4, wished for nothing more than death and understood that he was actually reaching out to help much like he is. Honglu, who much like Ishmael had his entire life dictated and controlled by someone else with no agency of his own. And Honglu, who much like Heathcliff and Don Quixote, suffered through his own fair share of trauma caused by their family. And look, we've already seen facades and dreams fall apart. Don Quixote's taken that mantle. But what do you do with someone who truly wants for nothing and lives life as a stone to be passed around as nothing? What is a more cruel act to inflict upon someone than to give those that never considered a life agency only to rip it away? Who could really bear that much pain? And more importantly, when will the person we know is Honglu fall away? Canto 8, The Surrendered Witnessing, will not only be about which side wins and which one loses, but it will also be about his family, Dante, and the rest of the sinners witnessing the surrender of Honglu as his trademark smile finally shatters, and we'll be left asking if we even have the right to pick up the pieces.
Before ending off, I want to end this video with a few words on my own experience with Honglu's source material. I'll be showing information on screen as I go through the story so you don't get bored to death. I don't know really. That's really for editing Melvader to figure out what the heck he ends up doing with this section. But The Realm of the Red Chamber is probably the one book that I've read in my life that has left such a long and profound impression on me. And it's probably the most tragic and saddest book I've read in all my life. Not only because of the thematics that are present in the book and the nature of it all, but also because I ended up realizing that I actually relate a lot to Honglu. He's by far my favorite sinner out of the entire cast, and reading this book not only gave me a greater understanding of him as a character, but also life as a whole. Now that isn't to say I've reached peak Buddhism and have let go of my earthly desires, but it did give me an understanding about how I feel about my own feelings regarding family abuse and depression. This will probably be its own video at some point when I reach over 100,000 subscribers and do a draw my life or something like that. But personally I have suffered from depression for a large part of my life. Of course I'm over it, because frankly I wouldn't be here having the energy to make YouTube videos if I didn't. But the way Honglu's nihilism and depression was represented in the book genuinely made me sad for a week straight after finishing it. Most of my life I had similar worldviews to Honglu. Meaninglessly gazing away at passing trees or also on a bus to school, staying up at night and wondering what the meaning of my existence really had and what I meant to the people that are supposed to care about me. Wondering why I was born into the family I was. Well, I'm sure you can fill in the blank there. This is all to say that I really hope that Project Moon can actually pull off the thematics of the book and convey the way I feel about it. Project Moon and their games are the reason I got out of my depression in the first place with Liber and Vuna. How that despite the horrible world that people live in and how easily they are willing to take advantage of one another, that there are still people who hold on to hope for their own reasons and make the best of what they can. And if Project Moon can replicate those exact same feelings in Canto 8, well, I'll love nothing more than that. I'll probably cry literal buckets of tears playing Canto 8 myself, and speaking of which, I will actually be sharing that experience with my audience. Right now I'm still uncertain about whether I can actually do it, but I'm planning to hopefully afford a new PC by the time Canto 8 comes around, so that I can stream. I want to stream my experiences playing through Canto 8, and probably cry like a literal baby in front of everyone if it happens to be anything like I predict it will be. But let's be real, the chances are probably slim anyways. So if you really want to see that at some point, please do consider liking or subscribing, or perhaps even becoming a channel membership if you want to monetarily fuel my upcoming depression. Anyway, that's all for me. It's up to editing Melvader to figure out how the hell he's going to fit this entire script in the span of weeks. And if you enjoyed this video, consider checking out the other long form videos I've made so far. My Healing Ego tier list is really a recommendation to watch. Anyway, that's all for me. Take care, and I hope that this video can make you appreciate playing through Canto 8.